Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Amy.
And I'm Sarah. And today it's our podcast's second birthday, and we have a very special guest with us today.
We are so thrilled to have the extremely talented and brilliant romance and romantic suspense author, Mia Sheridan. Welcome, Mia.
Thank you so much. Brilliant. I don't know that I've ever been called brilliant, so thank you.
We call you brilliant frequently between the two of us.
Yeah, all the time.
We have to tell you how incredibly special it is for us to have you on our birthday episode. So Sarah and I were introduced to you a few years back, and we fell in love with your writing. We quickly began reading your backlist. And after reading The Where Duet, which is our personal favorite of anything that you have written, that sent us on this journey of mind-blowing discussion between the two of us. I mean, it was just such a compelling story. And we credit that discussion for being the catalyst of starting this podcast. So it is incredibly special to have you on here for our second birthday. Thank you so much for joining us.
What an honor. Thank you so much. And I love so much that that's a personal favorite of yours because Josie specifically has such a special place in my heart. And I usually always, if somebody asks me, who's your favorite heroine? And that's a difficult question to answer, but she always comes to mind and is definitely at the top of that list for me personally. So
yeah, well, we can definitely see why, because she's one of our favorites and we think about that story constantly and still talk about it years later after reading it. So congratulations on all your success. Before we jump in with our questions, we would love to play a little game with you. It's This or That Book Edition. Would you like to play with us today?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. One book or multiple books at a time when you're reading?
One book. One book. Yeah, I can't split my mind nor my emotions between two stories at the same time. So absolutely one book, reading or writing.
Yeah, we relate to that because we're both one book at a time. Okay, one point of view or a dual point of view?
I think dual point of view. If I have to go with one, dual point of view, but I think it can work either way.
Yeah, it can work either way. I love when you do a dual point of view because that's just my favorite. I love to get into the mindset of like both the male and the female character and just kind of see what everybody's thinking. Happily ever after or a bittersweet or sad ending?
Oh, happily ever after all the time. Every time.
Preference.
Yeah. It's like life is too messy. We need to have some happiness every now and then. Okay. Physical book, ebook, or audiobook?
Ebook.
Ebook.
I am getting a little bit more into back into physical books, but it's just, especially when you have a husband who goes to sleep a little earlier, ebooks are a must.
Yes, see, that's where I'm at. I love it. And I can also you can, look up what a word means, or you can highlight things, and it's just nice to have it lit up. So
are you a morning reader or a night reader?
Night reader. Yes. Nothing better than knowing that a great book awaits you in bed at night. You can just relax and delve right into it and immerse yourself.
I love that. Slow burn or fast action?
I'm going to go with fast action.
Which is interesting because you write slow burns.
I do. Yeah. And I think it does depend, but if I had to choose one or the other, and especially right now, I'm just loving like the fast paced sort of thriller-ish, take off from page one storyline.
I love that. All right. Friends to lovers or enemies to lovers?
Enemies to lovers.
Same. And last one, comedy or angsty read?
Oh, I'm gonna say angsty read, but sometimes I avoid those too because they can definitely, mess with my heart in such a way that I have a hard time letting them go afterwards. But I think I do prefer them to comedy.
yeah, so you get that post-book depression.
I do, exactly. Yeah. See,
yes. We love that. Okay, so we're ready to dive in.
Yeah,
are you ready for some questions?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we have seen a lot of your work and including some of your older stories circulating on social media, which is so exciting to see that. Do you feel like social media has helped you get in front of new readers?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I'm constantly just in utter awe and, have so much gratitude for, the influencers who share such gorgeous artwork, from the beginning when, bloggers would do teasers, and it's really kind of morphed through the years to TikTok and Facebook and now Instagram. And so it's changed a little bit, but without that, that sharing of the beautiful pictures and the quotes and all of that, I don't think I would be where I am right now. So I just have such immense appreciation for all the people who share my work.
I also love the visual imagery that social media
Yeah.
provides to stories. I really feel like it can help people image, get some imagery in front of them and help connect with the stories as well. So as we mentioned, we're big fans of yours, and we've read your entire backlist nearly. We even covered Bad Mother on a podcast episode. We've talked about many of your works on our podcast, but just in case some of our listeners are not familiar with you and your work, do you mind telling us a little bit of background on you, how you got started, how it's going?
Yeah, well, I started off writing exclusively romance, and mostly like sweet emotional romance. And gosh, I don't even know how many books I wrote in that genre, maybe, 15, 16, something like that, before I branched off into doing mystery romance. And then from there, I branched off further into doing romantic thrillers that have gotten quite a bit darker over the years. But I love exploring, the psychology of the human mind and the human heart. And it's so, it's such a thrill for me to tell stories that really delve into the intricacies of what it means to be human, and to, have dark, deep, all different kinds of experiences, and just kind of what motivates people to do certain things, either, whether that be great acts of love, or, great acts of terror sometimes. And so, I love exploring it all. But romance will always be my first love. And so I can't see myself doing any genre that doesn't have at least a small thread of romance involved.
I love that.
I do too. So where do you get your writing ideas from? What inspires you?
Oh, I've gotten them from all over. I mean, I'll take an idea anywhere I can get one. But sometimes I've been inspired by a quote or a song or something I read on the news, or sometimes I'll read another book that will, I'll say, oh, I thought it was going in this direction, or I wished it would have gone in that direction, and then a whole other story starts sort of spiraling out of that experience. So just anywhere and everywhere. Sometimes they've just popped into my mind seemingly from nowhere. So all kinds of places.
What does your writing process look like? Can you kind of walk us through what typical day or week or months, I don't know how long it takes you to write a book. Can you walk us through kind of what your writing process looks like?
Yeah, it usually takes me about 2 months to write a book from, page one through the end of the epilogue. And then, beyond that, the editing process can vary, and depending if I'm working with a publisher or not. But I like to work in the mornings. That's when my brain seems to be freshest. And I typically work for, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours a day or so, just, straight writing. That's not including any of the social media stuff or things like that. And that's usually how I work best. I find that, writing is such an intense undertaking, and it's not, I personally, I don't find it to be that type of job where I could do it straight for 8 hours. Like it just, I'm exhausted after writing, usually, because you really do, pour so much of yourself out into it, and you have 6 different voices some days coming at you. And so ideally 2 to 3 hours every morning and every day of, that 2-month period. before a book is completed.
What does your writing space look like? Do you use the same, like an office or something, or do you move around with a laptop?
I always sit at a desk, but it's moved around the house just because of different, life situations that have happened around here. I have 4 teenagers currently. And so I do like to sit at a desk. I don't, lounge on a couch with my laptop. It looks so nice when I see authors lounging, like, I wish I could. I just can't get that comfortable with a laptop. So I do sit at a desk, but it doesn't really matter to me where the desk is as long as it's quiet.
Do you ever model any of your characters after someone you know? And if so, do you find that beneficial or therapeutic?
I really don't. I have not so far. I mean, I think a lot of my characters maybe have little pieces of people in my life and people I know and people I love, but I thus far I have never modeled a character specifically off of anybody. Of course, my husband would say that every hero I write is based on him. So we won't.
We'll keep it our secret.
While you're writing. We won't let them watch this. Because of course they are, every single one. Um, the abs at least, that part. But no, I have not done that. I find it easier just to, come up with characters based on just
From
the
creative.
wide range I've witnessed throughout my life.
Yeah.
Many of your stories carry a heavy element to them. So, have you ever had a story that's haunted you or kept you up at night thinking about it?
One of my stories.
Mhm.
I think, one of the ones I just wrote, called All the Little Raindrops. I did have you guys read that? I don't remember.
You just finished it. I read it.
I had to give myself time because I was very nervous. And then when I read it, I was like, I don't know why I was so nervous, but yeah, but continue on.
I do when I write dark stories, I don't feel like I ever cross a line where I want the reader to understand what's happening, but I'm not really interested in bringing the reader there, to watch the worst part of what's going on. I can, allude to it, or because that's kind of what I like. When I read dark books, I want to get what's happening, but I don't necessarily want to stand there and witness it with my eyeballs.
Right.
And so that's how I write too. And I mean, I think that dark stories, even if it has romance in it, are not for everyone. But to answer your question, when I was writing that book, I tried to, I guess put some of what, I don't know, stories I've read in the news or sort of what I know goes on in, human trafficking situations and just that knowledge that I had and put some of that in the story. And so just to know that what I'm writing about is of course fiction, but it's not entirely fiction because this stuff does happen. And especially on the days where I'm specifically writing about that, it can be disturbing and I can definitely, kind of hold on to it emotionally. But yeah, that's kind of, I mean, people experience these things. And so I also don't think it's right for the rest of us to completely look away. I mean, I think you have to sometimes just to survive and live your life and not be weighed down by the world's trauma. But yeah, it can definitely affect me.
I love that you pointed out that you don't go into great detail with what the victims are enduring, because that is literally what I just said to her. Is I said, one of the things I love about Mia Sheridan's writing is you can take something that's very dark and very heavy, and you don't elaborate on it to the point that a person just can't even stomach to read it. You know what I mean? Like it's just you navigate those scenes so well.
Mhm.
And that is one of the reasons why we appreciate your writing so much, because you're telling a story, but you, like you said, you don't go into this great detail as far as certain scenes. And I appreciate that because it's, I don't know.
Especially the heavier topics too.
Yeah.
I think that's important. And I love that you do that.
We love that. Okay, so we're going to go from a dark haunted to a fun question. What is a weird specific detail that you know about one of your characters that is completely irrelevant to the story?
Oh my goodness. My brain is filtering through all the books. Okay, this is maybe not exactly an answer to that question, but it's sort of it a little bit is. And the first thing that came to my mind when I first started writing, I really described everything. Like I described what the character was wearing down to, the shoes and the hairstyle and blah, blah, blah. And I think I read a couple reviews that criticized that. And I kind of thought, oh, well, I like to know like what the heroine's wearing. Like I like to picture that. But as I kind of, grew in my writing, I realized that it's really not necessary to describe every single detail. And so I had a couple of my earlier books re-edited by an editor, and I mentioned that. I said, hey, go ahead and take out the fact that she's wearing like these little duck pajamas or whatever I had put, and take this out and take that out. And she said, I see what you're saying, but I'm going to leave some of that because that's kind of the charm of your first books. Like, that's who you were then. Let's not remove all of it. Like, I get that you don't do that anymore. And so I kind of thought that was sweet because I was like, that was who I was then. That's what I did, right or wrong. And it probably was wrong. A lot of things I did were wrong. But anyway, I guess to answer your question, my character Evie wears duck pajamas and it's irrelevant. Nobody needed to know that. It didn't matter at all to the story. And yet I put it in there because I did. So
I loved it. So I would not be the person writing that because I am curious because I always try to picture it and then I go and look up like an outfit that is similar to what is described or something. So
we create Pinterest boards for books that we're covering on the podcast so we can have that imagery. And if you had said duck pajamas, you could have found an
instantly.
image.
Yes, 100%.
I'm always curious. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say the problem is it becomes dated. Like, if you describe an outfit on a character in 2015, 2025, people are like, why is she wearing that? So anyway.
That's fair. I'm always curious to know how many books you have that are unpublished or that you just have tucked away in Mia's laptop or somewhere that you have started and never finished or just started, finished, and never published.
I only have 3 of those and they're not fully done. I think I have 3 books that are like half finished where I got to the middle and I was like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't like this book. It's not making any sense, whatever. And I just put it away and I thought, well, maybe at some point, I will, come back to this, but thus far I have not. So
I'm curious, how long have they been like on hold? Because it's been
years and years. Yeah, years and years. Yeah, are you guys hearing this dinging? Okay, good. My text was dinging. Like, I need to tell him to stop. Stop contacting.
No, you're good.
Yeah, they've been sitting there for years and years, and thus far, I have not been re-inspired to finish them. So who knows?
See, now I'm curious. I feel like you should bounce those ideas off. Let's just see what happens. Let's just see. Okay, you can take it somewhere. Okay, what do you feel is your most underrated book?
My most underrated book. I think I'm going to go with More Than Words. And I think that I put that book out in the midst of having just published several very sweet heroes, like real cinnamon roll heroes. And Callan Hayes is a real mess. He is a mess. He is very unlikable. And I think that that book just did not hit at that time. I think that people were wanting what I had kind of, become known for, these real sweet, vulnerable heroes. And so I don't know. I don't know that it's underrated. I mean, maybe it is, but maybe, I understand the reason for that too. That he's a tough one to love initially. And so I think that that one sort of just was like, that's not one of Mia's, typical heroes. But he is, and he is. And I have such a soft spot in my heart for him because he didn't get as much love because he's difficult to love. And I get that. But yeah, so I guess I love him a little more because I love him enough for everyone who doesn't. I don't know. That's how it goes, right? With all your babies.
A lot of your characters face these unimaginable situations. Can you tell us maybe what one of your hardest scenes to write was?
I would say that probably there were a couple scenes with Josie and where the blame lies that were difficult for me to write, just her being victimized so terribly. And I think that there were a few scenes in Archer's voice too, where I wanted to portray him as vulnerable and as sweet, but I didn't want him to seem like a kid. I didn't want him to seem like a little boy that she was coming in and rescuing. And so that was a difficult balance for him to express that trauma in a way that a man would, but with the memories of a child too. So yeah, that was a difficult balance and some real heaviness there as well.
I think you nailed it on both of them. Because Archer's voice is one of I think that was my very first.
Yeah, that was both of our our first.
And then we dove into the Where duet. So we kind of go around through all the dark and the cinnamon roll guys, so it's like we just kind of think Mia Sheridan can do no wrong. She can do it all. Okay, so many of your stories, you've mentioned this, they have a component of psychology attached to it. Is it because of your education in clinical psychology that you enjoy writing stories that address that, kind of delve into that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I would have, I've loved just the area of study for a long, long time. And I think whether I had, majored in that in college or not, I think I would have been drawn to creating characters that, where I could really do a deep dive into their psychology anyway. But yes, I think definitely just learning some of the, I don't know, detailed areas of clinical psychology and stuff has helped me develop characters and helped me, form how they would react to certain situations and things like that. But yeah, I've been obsessed with the psychology since I was, a teenager. So
it's extremely fascinating.
It really is. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of your stories resonate so much, because we always are having conversations about trying to understand people and why do they do things they do. And a lot of your books have brought up very in-depth conversations for Amy and I. This is so intriguing because I never would have thought of like the way a person is thinking and what their motivation is for why they do why they do what they do. And so I love that you have that element in your writing.
So I know that you said you don't really write about people that but a lot of authors will put pieces of themselves into their story. So do you feel like there's a character, a little piece from a character from yourself that you have written into one of your stories, or more than one story?
I would say that probably my earliest work has the most of me in the heroines specifically, just because at that point, clunky as my writing was, I don't think I knew how to separate myself from my heroines. I just, by and large, wrote what I would do in certain situations. I didn't, I wasn't, um, I wasn't as good at crafting characters that were really separate from myself. So definitely my earliest work, and probably specifically Evie from Leo. She was my first one. But again, it's like, that meme where it says what I'm envisioning, and it's like this, this elegant horse, and painting of a horse, and then it shows what I've created, and it's like this stick drawing. It's kind of like that. Like my earliest work was like I had this thing in my head, but I didn't know, I wasn't good yet at completely transferring it onto the page. Not that I'm, any kind of master at it now, but I think I have definitely improved greatly over the years from where I started.
Is there someone when you are in the creative process that you bounce ideas off of?
My husband.
Poor
guy. Oh God. when I'm writing a book, yeah, my husband here is plot talk for months and months at a time. Like every dinner we go to, every morning over coffee, he we go over things, and I'll ask him his opinion. And he's a police officer, so when I'm writing a book with a cop in it, he definitely comes in handy there.
Oh, I love that.
I love having that resource. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Is there a character, we've talked about a scene that's difficult to write, but is there a character that you found extremely difficult to write?
Funny enough, Archer was very, very tough for me. And I've said before that he really didn't start speaking to me until like maybe 50-60% through the book, which kind of seems apropos now, right? But when I was writing it, I remember thinking to myself, I'm just writing blind. I have no idea who this guy is. I don't get him. I'm not sure. I knew the story so well, and I loved the story, but this guy, I just could not figure him out. And so finally, I kind of toward the end, we started, vibing together. And I had to go back and kind of like rewrite the first half of the book, adding in like his personality and who he was, because it was just like a mystery to me until then.
That's so interesting, especially like when you read it. I never would have dreamed ever that was kind of the journey you went through with that character. So I love hearing that and having that little
nugget behind the
scenes. Okay, so what do you feel is the strangest or craziest writing idea that you've had that actually made it into a book?
I have some crazy upcoming ones that I can't speak too much on. I wish I could, but I will. I don't know if you've read the premise of What Was Savaged and is being re-released in July, Unwanted.
Love Savage. Yes.
So that was kind of a weird idea. It was a really weird idea. That I don't want to give any spoilers, and I'm trying to remember what spoilers are. Basically that this little boy grew up alone in, the wilderness, and everything that was happening, the crime that had been committed against him. That was a weird idea. But my weirdest idea, and I said it was a weird idea when I explained it I think I explained it to my husband. I said, I have this really weird idea. And I literally used those words. And then I explained to him what it was. And he was like, that's a weird idea, but it's cool. And if you're able to, it'll all be in the execution. Either you can do it, or it's just going to be a effing weird, like, piece of something. Like, we won't know what to do with. So that one's coming out in October, and it's called The Broken Places.
Oh, I'm excited.
Coming out through Montlake, and it's an effing weird idea, really weird. And so, yeah, if you guys read this, or if whoever's watching this reads it, let me know if you think it's as weird of an idea as
All
I
right, this is peak for sure.
Oh, I'm like,
We're here for it.
yeah, I'm ready.
When you're writing stories that have crossover characters like Travis and Gage from Arthur's Voice, do you feel like you have to go back and reread your manuscripts or your stories to get a handle on those, or do you feel like all those details stay with you in the forefront of your mind?
No, unfortunately, they do not. And I won't spell out every mistake I've made in some of the books going forward because maybe you haven't noticed. And so I don't want to call them out. But no, that's a really hard thing. And I just like have the utmost respect for authors who write series where it's like, 12 books, all the siblings or whatever, because there's so many little things and little strings that you can't possibly remember. You'd have to go back and reread the prior books every time. And who has time for that, right? And so you think you remember, or you come upon a part and you're like, I better double check this. But there's so many things that you don't even think to check. And so, you know, errors happen, but hopefully they're things that if the reader catches them, they don't, they're just kind of little, I don't know, little fun catches to make rather than that they destroy the story completely. Um, but yeah, those are always when I discover those, it's just like, it's just like your blood runs cold and you're just, no, no. Just like you want to rip all the copies from the world and you just want to run through the stores and scoop them all off the shelf and demand that everyone return. It's like I get really dramatic over those, but they're just kind of bound to happen. So
That's fair.
I think the reader should offer you some grace.
Uh-huh.
I think we should just offer some grace in those moments. Okay, what is your most recent favorite read that you've read personally? Not one of your works, but somebody else.
I just read, okay, this is another day in Mia's life where she completely fangirls over Tessa Bailey because a day should never go by where I don't. And you can probably look up 10 interviews online, and in 9 of them, I'm probably fangirling over Tessa Bailey. The 10th one, they just didn't ask the right question. But I just finished Tessa's latest, the Fangirl Down, loved it to the moon, like I always love her books. But I also saw that you guys are reading Unloved by Katie Regnery, and that is one of my favorites too. So I can't wait to hear what you guys think of that in the end, because I love Katie and I love her books, and I love that one specifically.
That was a great story.
Yeah, I was going to say we could tell you
already. Okay.
loved it. So do you typically stay in the romance genre when you read, or do you like to read outside of the genre?
I actually I only read romance when I'm not writing, because it messes with me if I read it while I'm also writing it. But yeah, whenever I have a break, I'll, scoop up a couple of my favorites and try to read those. But I'm also given a lot of arcs, which is a wonderful thing, but it also kind of gets in the way of me choosing my own titles a lot because I want to be able to, especially support new authors, and that's always fun. So I don't read a lot, actually. I wish I could, but I don't read a ton, unfortunately.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah.
I understand that. So I can imagine that you have to write under deadlines. So I'm curious if there's ever been a time where you were under the pressure of a deadline and had to submit something that you weren't as thrilled about submitting had you not had that pressure? And if so, do you get the opportunity to rewrite that in the editing process?
Yeah, the first draft, I mean, I've kind of learned to give myself grace with the first draft, because I, have seen over and over again that something I feel maybe a little shaky about, once it goes through the process, comes out something I'm proud of, especially when I have these amazing editors working on my books who are just, I mean, I cannot praise them enough. I just turned in the last edit on The Broken Places today, and I just like the things that these editors find, even in the final rounds. It's just like 10 of us have read it already and they're still finding these great little things. And so, yeah, the first draft is usually, it needs work for sure. And it's usually not up to what I hope it will be when it comes out in the end. But, I've done this enough that I know it will be. It will be as close to, perfect as it can be
How
in the
many
end.
times do you typically go through and edit? Like, do you personally read through the story how many times? Once, twice, a dozen?
I typically read through it 3 times, which is, 2 times more than I want to.
Sure.
You start hating your characters at that point, and the whole thing is stupid. You just, you want to tear it up and burn it. But you're still catching things at that stage. And that's also the stage where this thing from back to front. Like, every single detail of the story and every conversation. And so you can remember that you used this specific word in chapter 3 and you shouldn't use it again, and blah, blah, blah. So it's really necessary. But it's not fun to read through your own book again and again and again, but it's part of it.
No, if I wrote your books, I would be pretty proud of myself. I would be thrilled to read my own stuff. Like I wrote like Mia Sheridan. Okay. Do you ever get recognized out in public? And if so, what is that like?
Maybe like once or twice, but in general, no, I do not expect to ever be recognized like at the grocery store. No,
Do you
I don't
see,
think so.
well, to sidestep that, do you ever see people reading your books and go up and talk to them, or do you just keep going if you see someone with your book?
Oh no, I would never go up and somebody reading my book.
You would make your day.
Actually, it's kind of a funny thing. My daughter's in college now, but when she last year in high school, she came home and she was in like maybe a creative writing class or something, and they had to go around the room and say their favorite book. And she said, "Oh, Mom, one of the girls said my favorite book is Archer's Voice." And first of all, I was like, "Wait a minute, how old is she?" Like, I was disturbed that like a 17-year-old was reading my book. But anyway, but even like my kids, she never said anything. She was never like, "That's my mom." And Lila had a book club for college that they read my book, and she never mentioned one time that I was her mom.
Wow.
And they all called me. We did a Zoom on it, and she asked me a couple questions, and then later she's like, "They still don't know you're my mom."
Wow.
I would be shouting it from the rooftops.
So I've heard you say before in another interview that there are a lot more layers to writing a thriller book than a romance book. Can you kind of talk us through a little bit about the differences between and kind of your process for writing a thriller versus a romance?
Yeah, I think one of the big differences is that, telling a good thriller story is all about where you come in. So are you going to be there at the beginning of the crime? Are you going to come into the middle when the crime's been committed? Are you going to, like there's all these points that you can start telling that story. Whereas a romance, typically you have them meet and, they go through the motions of getting to know each other, blah, blah, blah. So to kind of marry those two different tellings together, that can take some figuring out. Like, how am I going to describe this crime? Where are these people going to come in, and what's their love story going to be, and what's that journey going to look like in the midst of a thriller? Because it's hard to get sexy in the midst of like blood and murder sometimes. I mean, I manage it somehow, usually, which I don't know what that says about me exactly. But yeah, the other thing about a thriller is that you want to keep the reader guessing, but at the end, you don't want them to feel cheated. Like, you want them to feel like, "Oh, why didn't I see that?" you don't want them to feel like, oh, it was some person who was never mentioned on the page and came out of the clear blue sky, and I would have had no way to ever guess what was going on here. You want to kind of drop some clues, but not enough that they notice them. So there are just different elements like that in a thriller that you don't have to think about when you're writing romance. You just have to keep track of where the underpants are and, whether she had time to get up and go pee and have a UTI, a terrible UTI.
I always think about that as well.
Yeah.
Which all my heroines do, unfortunately. There's way too much snuggling and not enough UTI prevention.
We love it when authors can surprise us with those twists and turns that we didn't see coming, and your work often does that. So
Yes.
I love that balance that you have.
What do you do to celebrate a book release? Can you kind of take us through what a typical release day looks like or a week might look like for you?
I hate release days. I mean, it is, a celebration in that it's the culmination of all this hard work over months and months. But I find them so nerve-wracking, and you never know exactly what's going to happen. And you want to hear people's positive reaction, but that's not all you're going to get. And so, it can be emotional, and it can be just, it can be a lot. It can be kind of a heavy day. And so I try to, just do things that sort of distract me. I usually try to stay busy on release day, and it's a lot of saying thank you, and that's all great stuff. But yeah, I usually don't celebrate a lot on release day. I celebrate, when the book is done, when I've turned in the final draft, and that's a big celebration for me. And I'll go out to dinner and, have some wine, whatever. But release days are, I don't necessarily look forward to them, as bad as that might sound. It's not mine anymore. It's like I give it over to you, and I know that you won't treat this as gently as I did, and that's the way it should be. But it's also like it's a letting go.
That's one of the things we always say is these authors, you all put your heart and soul into it. And so we always try to just keep things in the positive, because not every book is going to be for everybody, but I still think you can be kind about reviews
About the
and
feedback,
stuff,
yeah.
the feedback, because that's somebody's baby that they've spent forever on.
Yeah, and I mean, usually like reviews aren't really necessarily for authors anyway. Like bad reviews can even be good. Like I know that a lot of people think my thrillers are, oh, this is too dark and blah and disgusting or whatever. But and that's, I didn't write the book for that reaction. However, what that reaction does is it warns other readers who might have that same reaction away from my book. So I don't get 100,000 blah reactions, because they read that and say, oh, I know I would feel the same way. So those can be good too. And you just have to keep all that in perspective. And at the end, like people's reaction to your book isn't really about you. You did the best you could. You told a story. You didn't mean to upset anyone or offend anyone. And you kind of just have to learn to, kind of just like breathe through those moments where, your book isn't for every person, and that's fine.
We want to round out our conversation with you with a handful of questions specific to some of your books. And if our listeners haven't read these books, maybe it'll be a little tease for them to go check those out. Starting with Once We Were Starlight, which we actually did kind of a little test episode with our first podcast. It was never aired. We didn't even record it, but on that book. And it covers a form of trafficking. And we found it very fascinating that you chose to focus on some of the challenges that people face once they're rescued from that situation. So can you talk a little bit about that story and how you chose to write on that topic?
That story, I almost feel like that story is like a fever dream. And I had a dream about that place years ago. And it just stayed in the back of my mind. I thought it was this weird dream. Like, what do I do with this? And it's like, it wouldn't go away. And finally I decided I got to sit down and write this. I don't even know if I'll publish it, but it just, it's stuck in my brain, and I'm going to sit down and write it. And I did. And trafficking, along with like, psychological study and the psychology of humanity, human trafficking is another one of my causes, one of my passions. The thing that I fight hardest against with my voice and my dollars. And so, that's a subject that is very, I guess I say near and dear to my heart, but that doesn't sound quite right because it's such a terrible, awful, horrific thing that happens in this world. But anyway, yeah, that book, I don't talk a lot about that book, actually. I feel like that's a book that readers can kind of find on their own. I almost feel weird advertising that book for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why, but I just it's almost like, a very personal book. I'm not sure. It's a strange book for me, but I keep it out there because people do find it and write to me really amazing messages. But yeah, I don't talk a lot about that one.
It is a special story, I feel like. And I mean, I mentioned that you talk a lot about the challenges that people face coming out of that situation. And that was something that before reading that book, that wasn't something that had been on the forefront of my mind. So I appreciated that perspective in trying to, think about what these victims actually go through once they do, the ones that are able to be rescued, get out of, and it is a challenge for them. So it is a special story.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll move on to the next is The Wish Collector, which is another beautiful story of redemption and self-forgiveness. That's one of my personal favorites. I love this story so much. This story has a dual timeline with historical fiction line and contemporary romance line. Do you find it easy or challenging to write a story that captures two very different eras and romances so cohesively?
I do. Yeah, that one was a challenge for me, and I've only done that one other time. It's difficult, and I think that going back and forth between two stories, sometimes it's hard to hold readers' interest in both narratives simultaneously, sort of. So I rarely do that. But that book actually, it came from a project I did for an author who was going to publish a number of short stories. I think they were like 5,000 words or something like that, with the same prompt for all the authors. And the prompt was a hidden letter. And so I wrote this short story and the project fell through. And my husband just loved that short story for whatever reason. And he kept saying, you need to make that into a novel. And I was, I don't care, I just put it away. It didn't work out. And then the story actually did start coming to me, and I had said no to him so long, like, stop bringing that up. I'm not writing that book. And I guess he was persistent enough that it finally worked out, because I sat down and created a full-length novel out of that short story. But anyway, that's just kind of a little bit of background on that one.
He's just wanting you to write him as the hero.
Yeah, exactly. He's
Like, I need you to write me.
abs again.
It's so good. Do you write the two timelines simultaneously, or do you do it one at a time?
Oh, yeah, I wrote them simultaneously. I went back and forth. It's hard for me to write out of order, even in that way, because I feel like every chapter, even if it's from a different point of view, builds, on the one before it, emotionally and just, as far as content. So yeah, it's hard for me to write here and then travel back here, mostly emotionally. It doesn't feel as cohesive, I guess.
Yeah.
So we would be remiss not to include a question specific to the Where duet, since it is one of our favorites here. And we love that duet because, well, and several other of your stories, because you have this way about writing in such a way that it makes you feel things for the antihero, and you're left wondering, should I be feeling this way or not? And that really is what sparked a lot of the conversation between Sarah and I on this book. And I will say, I will say to our listeners, this question is going to be spoilery, so that we saved it for the very end. This is one of the last questions we're going to ask. So if you do not want to be spoiled on this duet, I invite you to press pause, come back after you've listened to it. But we've always wanted to ask you this question, and here's our opportunity. So we spent a lot of time discussing the differences between a psychopath versus someone who's been merely traumatized and seeking revenge. We feel like Charles is the latter, as he clearly shows emotion and connection with Reed and Josie. And because of that, we think perhaps Charles was in love with Josie. Can you share your thoughts and perception on this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that was definitely my intention. I never saw Charles as a psychopath at all. He did have his own form of empathy, even if his, sense of justice was highly immoral. And he was obviously extremely disturbed and traumatized. But yes, I think that he fell in love with Josie in the way he could. I can't imagine his love was a love that any of us would desire, to any great extent. But for as far as he was capable, he absolutely loved Josie. And, that's why he, did what he did in the next book too. I won't spoil too much, but yes,
Yeah.
you are correct.
In the ending of the first book, and I won't say, but that scene where they interact and he leaves her standing there, I just remember feeling like, I feel sad right now. And I don't know if I should feel sad. Like I feel empathetic to him or sympathetic to him. And I don't know if it's weird that I'm feeling this way. And I immediately messaged Sarah and I'm like, I feel this way about this character. Am I alone? And she said, no, you're absolutely in agreement with me on that. And so we just find it fascinating that you do the way you write these anti-heroes and just making people feel connected to them when you're wondering, should I feel connected to them? I'm not sure. I love that.
Oh, I love hearing that too. And that was absolutely my intention. And so I love hearing that even more because I hoped to hear that, because that's how I felt as I was writing him too. So, you and me.
We love it.
We're in it together.
We're in it together. So if you haven't read it, you need to go read it because it's incredible.
It is.
We always love hearing about upcoming books that you are working on. We get very excited here. What other plans do you have for 2024?
So in July, Unwanted, which was previously published as Savaged, will be out with a brand new cover and re-edited, though the story remains completely the same. And then let's see, in October, the extremely weird premise of a story comes out through Montlake. It's called The Broken Places. And let's see, what else do I have after that? I have a few projects that I don't have a date for yet. One of them is called Heart of the Sun, and that is coming out through Canary Press, but I do not have a date on it yet. And that is, it's sort of, how did they describe it? A bodyguard meets an end of the world type of a storyline, which I loved writing. That I cannot wait to immerse myself in editing that because I loved that world so much, which when you read it, you'll know that doesn't say great things about my stability. But right now I'm on a break for another couple weeks or so, and then I start writing the follow-up to Unwanted. It's another very extremely vulnerable character who has gone through absolute hell. My very favorite type of hero to write.
Well, you write them so well. I mean, clearly that's what we need.
We're excited about all of those.
We're very excited.
Mia, it has been a true honor to get to chat with you and just share our second birthday celebration with you. Thank you so much for joining us on our second birthday episode.
It was my honor, and happy birthday.